Good morning, everybody. How are we all this morning? I do hope you're very well indeed. Can you please, those people who are watching me live on Facebook this morning, would you just be kind enough to just kind of give me a wave and make sure that you can hear me? Because Facebook spontaneously decided this morning to change all of its settings. So I have absolutely no idea whether you can see me, hear me, whether you can see my little special guest this morning, any of those kind of things. So if you could possibly tell me that I'm coming through loud and clear, that would be great. I can see that there's lots of you in the room, but what I can't see is if anybody can actually hear me, which would be good. So if those kind of comments, Trisha is saying yes, loud and clear, brilliant, fantastic. Oh, that's good. Right, I'll say hello to a few people in the room this morning, but I want to introduce you to the star of the show today. I've got a new helper. It's not new, she's staying at our house at the moment. This is Frankie. You may have seen her pop up in broadcast before. Actually, all she wants to do this morning is sleep. But she's been winding my two dogs up, so she's got to be in the studio with me. So I'm going to stash her under the desk. And then I'm going to say good morning to all of you. What is it? Never work with children or animals? This will be interesting, won't it? Let us see what we have going on in the room. Kareen, you get the award of the day for being the first person to comment. Who else is in the room? Sue, Martina, Trisha, Jane, Maureen, Anne, Heather, good morning. Julie. Julie is saying spring is coming to Melbourne. That's good to hear. Morning, Mr. Templeman. Sup? Anna, who else have we got? People saying that they're going to tune in later. That's absolutely fine. Not a problem at all. And Pen is saying that she's actually got time to watch today. It's lovely to have you here. Linda, that's very good. Good morning. Jilly, lots of people waving. Fran is in sunny Weymouth. Fran, I have to say thank you this morning for expanding the Learning to Paint group exponentially this morning. Thank you very much for that. Who else? Lynn, Joe, lots people not working here, just buffering, found you, technology against me. Right, okay. I do believe that is something to do with Facebook. It's certainly fine my end. So what you might need to do is to refresh the page. I tell you all of the technical nonsense that's going on, but unfortunately it's nothing to do with me this morning. Lots of people saying that it's fine, so I think there's a bit of a mismatch in the software. I'm going to carry on absolutely regardless, and then what will happen is that if there's an issue with it, then we'll all watch it back together later. I'll repost it later. But I think that you're having a mixed bag. I'm pretty sure that's to do with the joy that is Facebook, and that you just have to sometimes just put up with, unfortunately. Right, I need to catch you up on what it is that we've been doing and what I've been doing between last week and this week. So we left it last week, didn't we? We'd done a little bit of background in. We had done some brusho in the background as well, and I had started the honeycomb. So I'll take you to the overhead camera and you'll be able to see exactly where I've got it so far. So here is where I've got it to at the moment. And you probably see that I have pushed it on a little bit from where it was. So we've got that cerulean that I put in the background. You can see the yellow that I put in. I put that lemon in. Looks a little bit greeny in the camera, but it's not as green as it's coming through. And then I started on the honeycomb. But of course, what you can see now is that the honeycomb is almost complete. Haven't quite decided if I finished that yet. Jury's out on that. And then I started filling in the darks. So I can see that a couple of you are saying that Facebook is requesting that you restart, and it seems to be working fine in an app, but not so great on a laptop. Don't you love these things? Okay, so Lots of people are saying that they've got the circle of doom. Yes, I quite understand. It is a Facebook thing. I absolutely promise you it is broadcasting fine from my end. So let's carry on. I'll do the recording. And good morning, Anita. And we'll see how far we get, shall we? I will post things later on so that you can catch up. What I do want to show you is a little time lapse of me carrying on with this from where you saw it. So let's show you that. So you can see me, I worked my way around that honeycomb and I used a variety of colours. I was using the Moon Glow, I was using the Rose of Ultramarine, and I was also using quinacridone gold and cerulean. Now, apologies that my head is in shot there. I was using different cameras on the day, testing things out. Morning, Trisha. And so I'll let it play again. So there's the Moon Glow going in. There's the quinacridone gold going in. And in a minute you can see there's the Rose of Ultramarine. And the cerulean going in too. So I made some decisions about where those colours were going and what it was that was going to happen to them. There you can see the black going in as well. And I'll talk to you more about that in just a second. I just want to take you through all the things that we did. So you've got here was the cerulean in the background, and we've got the Moon Glow, and we've got the quinacridone gold, and we've got the Rose of Ultramarine too. Now, one of the things that I started to do as well was to look at the blacks. That was quite important. That was something that I needed to sort out in my head about where blacks were going to go, where the darks were, the kind of parts that were dark, the parts that were bright. I'm making all of these decisions as I go along. So you can see I've popped a little bit of a dark in along the edge of the wing, and I started to put some dark behind the flower head that we've got in here. Now, I've still got my watercolour head on, all right? I've still got the Jane's Gray kind of watercolour-y head on, but I need to leave that behind a little bit now because I need to get to gouache. Why do I need to get that to gouache? Because gouache is going to be a much flatter appearance. It's going to give me a much more solid colour. And I need it to do that because I've done the soft kind of art interpreted way of painting the background with that kind of wishy-washy kind of look to it, that ethereal look that watercolour gives. And now I need to really think about how I'm going to make the bee pop. So there's a couple of things that I wanted to show you on the close-up camera because it occurred to me that there were some alterations that I made that you might not appreciate. Now, Jo is saying that she is pleasantly surprised that she didn't expect the honeycomb to be multicoloured. Yeah, that sort of came to me as I was doing it, Jo. That was a bit of a late decision. But I was concerned that if the honeycomb was all one colour, then it might look a bit static. So that was my reason for thinking about that. But when I came down to the bottom and I was painting, I noticed something else. I noticed that I had a bit of a discrepancy down here on the back side of my bee. I noticed that I had a line coming in here with the fluffiness that didn't continue over on this side. You can see that I've had to extend it in pencil over there. And I noticed as well that these two things didn't match up. This line of fluff didn't carry on round the corner, or it did carry on round the corner, but it was too high up. And sometimes you really don't notice these things until you start to paint it. So I had to extend a little line there too. Those I will ink in at a later date. And there were all sorts of other things that I noticed as well. If you come up here to this little bit of honeycomb here, you'll notice that it didn't have an edge to it. And I painted it yellow and then realised that actually there's probably a little line there. Now you could argue that that is being wildly pedantic, and yes, it is wildly pedantic, but of course we don't want, after all of this effort that's gone in, we don't want to fall at those kind of hurdles. So that is also something that I've got to alter. I think I've got to have another line coming in that down there somewhere, and then it's got to be blue beyond that. But those are things that I can alter with gouache. Those are things that I can alter in other ways later on. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to talk very briefly. It's only going to be a short little broadcast today, mostly to do with the fact that Facebook is being a pain in the behind. I want to talk about the difference between the softness of our watercolour greys, darks, or whatever it is that we've chosen, and gouache. So you can see here that I've managed to get that misty quality, which is the Jane's Grey. That's a Daniel Smith watercolour. And part of me quite likes it. The other part of me is concerned that it's going to get lost in the background of everything else. So I started using the Jane's Grey in a little more heavy fashion, but realised I couldn't sustain that, because you can see here that where I was loading my brush and filling in, I've got a paler patch, so that's going to need another glaze. And then it suddenly occurred to me that actually, if I leave that for the time being and use a dark to fill in the antenna and the eyes, then I'll be able to see the compromise between those two things. So let's introduce you to the materials that I'm going to be using today. I've got my ceramic palette, and here are the colours that I've been using in the background. Just in case you're not aware of the system that I use with my watercolours, I use them squeezed out from a tube. I squeeze them into an empty pan, and then I allow them to dry so that I can either spray them or re-wet them, and that is the perfect consistency for me to be able to cover my brush without having to scrub away at the surface or getting little dollops of colour. So that's the Rose of Ultramarine that I was using. That's the Moon Glow. That is the Quinacridone Gold, and that's the Jane's Grey that I was using for the head. Now, the only colour that I'm slightly disappointed with on this paper is the Moon Glow. Because this is the Two Rivers paper, it has slightly sucked the colour out of them. So it's just such an absorbent paper, and it's so heavy. Don't ever assume that a colour is going to look the same on all brands of paper, okay? So I might have to do something else to those. That's kind of why I've left them alone. They look a little bit scrappy at the moment, but I've sort of left them alone because I don't want to rush, and I certainly don't want to make those all pristine and finished before I've even started working on this bee. So with a project of this kind, it does mean that I can afford to kind of leave a little bit and come back to it later, because I'm working in small sections. Morning, Lynn. Viv, I'm glad that you're not having problems at all. I think Facebook is a different entity to different people this morning. Now, lots of people are commenting about the Jane's Grey. Looks a bit like neutral tint. Yes, Nula, you're absolutely right. It is nice and neutral. It has a slightly lilac-y undertone, but ever so slightly, which does make it look a little bit similar to the Moon Glow on screen. This has got a slightly warmer tinge to it, but it is a really nice colour. Morning, Joe. And that's why I've been using it. Now, in terms of, for you pigment nerds out there, Jane's Grey is a combination of burnt sienna and French ultramarine. And of course, you could argue that you could mix those two things together to get your grey, but believe me, I've tried that, and nothing is as good a mix as that Jane's Grey is. Now, the colour I'm going to introduce you to now was a colour that we experimented with when we were testing out our colours a couple of weeks ago. Now, this is gouache, so this is a much heavier much, and I don't mean that in a negative way, it just covers much more easily. It has much more body to it. That's why it used to be called body colour, and it has a much more even consistency. You've just got to understand how to mix it correctly on your palette. So what I'm going to do for you here is show you how I mix the consistency up. Actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take B away so that I can place my palette onto my little non-slip mat there, and it's not going to go anywhere. That would be easy. Oh, excellent, Julie. Glad you're back in the room. So here it is. You can reconstitute this. You can squeeze it out into a palette, come back to it when it's dried and reconstitute it. You just have to mix it with a little bit of water first, otherwise it will crack. Now, I don't need an awful lot of it. Gouache is really good in terms of value for money because you don't need an awful lot. And I've got my two SAA imitation sable brushes here. I've got a 4 and a 2. That's very small for me. That's very little spiky and tweaky, isn't it? But I've got my 4 here. I'll probably use the number 2 for filling in, but it would be futile to try to mix this to a good consistency with something so tiny as that. So I've got my number 4 here, and I've got my pot of water just slightly out of shot, and I need my kitchen roll as well so that I can control the amount of water. Now, what I'm after with the gouache is somewhere between single cream and double cream consistency. So Trisha is asking a very pertinent question. Is gouache similar to acrylic? It is in terms of what you need to do to it on the palette to get it to work to how you want it to. But acrylic dries waterproof and gouache doesn't, which means that it is constantly editable, okay? Thea, yes, good morning, my lovely. You will find that in the comments, people will be able to tell you that Facebook is playing up this morning. Not me. I wish there was something I could do about it, but sadly not. So over here, I'm mixing it into single cream. I'd like to say it's single cream. It's sort of a little bit thicker than that. That's why I say single cream, double cream consistency. You want it to make a nice flat finish, and by flat I mean even coverage, but you don't want it to be sticky on the surface, otherwise you're going to end up in trouble. So I think that's going to be okay for what I need. I'm just going to do a little bit of reorganizing to my right. Move things out of the way. Let's move that so that that's slightly in shot so you can see me load my brush. In actual fact, let's move this across, then that would be easier, wouldn't it? There we go. Oh, I astound myself sometimes. So here's B back again. Now, what I want to work on are the antenna, the eyes, which need a highlight, but that can be put in afterwards. Yes, Linda, you're absolutely right. The gremlins weren't invited today. How dare they? Now, I also didn't think my painting through. Yeah, I didn't think it through because I got bell sleeves on today, so that's not good, is it? Oh, dearie me. So I got my number 2 brush, which I'm going to wet. Let's pop that across my water pot. I love these water pots, incidentally. This is the Faber-Castell Click and Go water pot, and I love it because you can rest your brush over the top. Isn't that clever? Isn't it clever? Little things. So let's load up my number 2 brush with my gouache. Now you'll see me do this a lot. You'll see me roll my brush between my fingers an awful lot. And I do that to make sure that I get coverage across my bristles. If I just put my brush in and pick up colour, what you'll end up with is very little colour on the back of the brush and a big dollop of colour on the front of the brush, okay? And so what I do, particularly with gouache all the time, you'll see me roll my brush backwards and forwards, usually at the side of the palette as well, so that by the time I get the brush into my hand, it's loaded really nicely and it's covered in colour. Good morning, Mum. Mum, there's gremlins in the work today. Have a word, would you? So let us start painting this in. Now, ordinarily, I would get my head about an inch from the surface of my paper, but I can't do that because you don't want to see my roots in shot. So I've got my extra strong glasses on, and I've got my very fine brush, and I'm going to paint this antenna in. So to start with, I'm painting in amongst those little furry marks that I made, and I'm pulling the colour along. I'm trying to be patient with myself. I'm trying to lay all of the bristles down onto the surface so that I get a nice continuous line, okay? And you can now see the difference between the two, can't you? You can see the difference between the gouache and the watercolour. So of course the question is, I think, do I need all gouache? Do I need all watercolour? Or do I need combinations of the two? And I think my preference is going to be for combinations of the two. Now I've made a slight little jog mark there. Oh, Mum's going to see the gremlins off. Cheers, Mum. I'm going to smudge that out with just the tip of my brush. This is very, very fine work. But coming together, I probably need to have a highlight on there somewhere, but not yet. And certainly no point in doing it until that gouache is dry. Let's start it the other way. Now I'm going to, if it was me, I'd probably be turning my paper around, but we've talked about this before, haven't we? I don't want to work across myself like that, otherwise you can't see me painting. But this time, I'm going to get that close-up camera in so that you can see me working on that antenna in fantastic detail. So this is where you get to see if I've got the shakes or not, isn't it? Like that. Okay, so I've also got to dodge the other side of my camera because otherwise I can't see what I'm doing. So there we go, getting the tip of that brush in, pushing it to the edge and then trying to lay it down as much as possible to drag that colour along. Very detailed for me. Very detailed for me. Frankie's just groaned from under the desk. I'm not sure if you could hear that. But I think she thinks I'm making far too big a deal of it. I think she's saying, oh, get on with it, Ali, for goodness sake. Right. Actually, I'm not sure if she's groaning or snoring, if I'm honest. Oh, dear. So let's get the end of that antenna in using the tip of the brush. Thank goodness these brushes have a nice fine point on them, and then I can smudge it into that gap, which I'm probably going to need to highlight later, but for the time being it works okay. Yes, it does require a little bit of practice, that stroke. Now while we're down here, let's do the eyes as well, shall we? So again, I'm going back into the gouache. I know you can't see it at the moment, but I'm going back into the gouache. I'm loading up my brush. It's also kind of important to note that one of the reasons for loading up your brush by rolling is that then all the bristles are covered in paint. And you want them to all be covered in paint because the belly of the brush, this bit here, which is next to the ferrule, so the metal part of your brush is called the ferrule, and then you've got the bristles, but the bit where one meets the other is called the belly. And you want the belly to have a lot of paint in it because the belly is what feeds the tip. There's absolutely no point at all in just coating the first couple of millimeters with paint because you'll run out way too quickly. It needs to act like a sort of fountain pen. So you can see there I've got really delicious velvet black paint all the way over my bristles so that I can get a continuous brush stroke. And Tricia, you're absolutely right. I held my breath the whole time you painted that stroke. To be honest, nearly passed out myself, Tricia, because speaking, holding your breath and painting at the same time probably aren't a particularly good idea. So let's go back in. I'm just got to dodge my camera again and smudge it around and about. Let's go in there and get that eye nice curve. So that's the bit that's a challenge, isn't it? Getting that curve in. And then pushed in between those furry lines, which I think what I'm going to have to do is go back in with a fine pen or something else, possibly, to bring those little furry marks out. But there's the eye. Ooh, and I can see, looking up this close as well, you can see as well where you need to extend things. So that needs bringing around the corner a little bit, doesn't it? There you go. So there's that eye in there. And then let's go back. So that was a single brush load of colour, wasn't it? Didn't have to dip back in at all. And that's because my paint is a really good consistency and because all of my brush is loaded. All right. So let's try this one over here. And so let's start with the top of the curve. Yes, Mum, you're absolutely right. It is a good brush, isn't it? It's a number 2. Possibly I should have gone down even smaller to a 0. But that's the stuff that madness is made of. Let's see if we can do it with the number 2. So bringing that around. Very good for your precision work. Very good practice for your precision work. I don't do precision nearly as much as I should do because obviously most of you know that I am a much bigger fan of the impressionistic. So there we've got that eye in as well. So let's see that from the normal overhead shot. And now, can you see the difference now between the gouache? Probably not a good idea to point at it with a brush load of colour, is it? That's asking for trouble, isn't it? So you can now see the difference between how watercolour looks on a piece of paper and how gouache looks on a piece of paper. Fran is asking a really good question. Would you use a rigger brush? I did think about that, Fran. So a rigger brush is a brush that has a much longer hair, used for painting rigging on ships. That's why it's called that. It can be a sort of 2.5 centimetres, an inch, or possibly even longer. The reason I didn't choose a rigger, Fran, was because I wanted to be able to control just the tip for waggling it, there's a technical term, waggling it back into the pattern of the bee itself, and I wouldn't be able to do that with a rigger brush. It would flick. That's kind of the idea of a rigger brush, so that would have made me very, very nervous indeed. So I've got I hope that answers the question, Fran. So now we've got gouache and we've got the watercolour, and you see now I've got a right conundrum going on, haven't I? Because do I turn that into gouache? Do I add a little bit of gouache? What do I do with those things? Where else is gouache going to occur? Do I leave the head like that? Do I substitute my gouache in here? So many questions and not necessarily all the answers available today. What I do know is that I've got a lot of black work ahead of me. So the things that I need to paint in black, so I spent a long time with this. Any of you that were on my Lima workshop last week will know that we had quite a lengthy discussion, didn't we, about alternating black and white. Well, of course, here we've got the same discussion. We're alternating black and yellow, and I'm petrified of painting the wrong bit in the wrong hole. Sue is asking a question. Can you also use watercolour with a thicker consistency? Yes, you can. What you won't get, Sue, is this kind of very matte, flat appearance to it, which doesn't necessarily pick up in the camera. But yes, of course, experiment with other things. It'd be interesting to see what else people came up with. So I knew that that needed to be dark. And then obviously there's probably a yellow in there. And then I wanted this flower to be backed with a dark so that it really starts to pop forward. Now I'm pretty sure, not positive, but I'm pretty sure that I want that to be done in a more watercolour style so it looks softer. So there is a chance that I will paint the background in with my gouache. Not entirely sure yet, but I'm pretty sure. Then I had to work out what was behind all of these leaves. So that little band in there is yellow. Then we've got black coming in, and I've got to make absolutely sure I know what is leaf, what is petal, and what is bee. Yes, and lose count when painting stripes. I think the adage is measure twice, cut once. Or count twice, paint once, I think is the thing, because you have to keep going black, yellow, black, black. Really make sure before your brush touches the paper that you've absolutely understood what your background colour is. So I've got to know behind there what's black, what is petal, what is columbine, what's ivy leaf. That's going to be something that I need to do when I've got plenty of quiet and plenty of time. Two things that I struggle to get at the best of times. So that is black in there. This one is yellow. Now this is interesting because this columbine was going to be yellow. So I've got to think very carefully about, do I use gouache for the yellow so that I can get a softer colour with a columbine? Those are decisions for the future. So that's yellow. That's black in there, this band. And then because I wanted it to be some sort of variation on a buff-tailed bumblebee, because that's my favourite bee, then I need to mix up a little buffy colour to go in there as well. So I've got to keep an eye on that. Now the bit that is really making my head spin going into the future is what colour these wings are going to be. So, and I don't know. So I'm going to leave those for a while until I've got things that I do know in. And of course the other thing that's going to need to be nice and black, and I'm pretty sure that I'm going to do that in gouache with some highlights, are these leg shapes. Now I could start them darker nearer to the bee and make them paler as they go out. I've got lots of variations and lots of combinations ahead of me to be able to think about what it is that I'm going to do and how I'm going to do it. So, goodness me, lots and lots of decisions to be made ahead of me. And I know that was only a short little demonstration today, but what I hope it does is kind of highlight the fact that with this kind of project, you can't skip ahead too much. You can't go, oh, well, I'm going to do this when that process is over there by the door. You've got to think, right, if I do this now, what's that knock-on effect going to be? So it's thinking about that process all the way through. And yes, it does make your brain hurt, but any of you out there who paint on a regular basis will absolutely know that painting wears you out. You come away thinking, well, I haven't done anything physical, but it's headspace all the time, isn't it? Now, lots of people are saying, how do you make those decisions? And some of them, yes, Fran, I had thought about that. Lots of those decisions are just a reaction, an artistic reaction, a bit of, I hate to say it, a bit of experience maybe. We all, and I, you know, it's not that they're going to be right. They're just combinations of things that I have possibly used in the past. If you're really not very confident about those decisions, you can have a separate piece of paper, can't you, and test out your theory before it goes on your final piece. But eventually you've got to make a decision and you've got to follow your way down that flow chart, haven't you, of going, do I use gouache or do I use watercolour for my bee? And then one route down is watercolour and the other route down is gouache. And you've just got to pick one. One isn't wrong and one isn't right. They're just two decisions to be made. And that is a little bit, what's the word I'm struggling for this morning? Intuition sometimes, artistic intuition, where you go, I think this. And then you kind of plough on forward and hope that it works. And it's no different as to whether you've got 2 weeks experience or 20 years experience. Those are decisions that have to be made. Yes, Anne, it's exhausting with all the decisions to make. Yes, absolutely. Now, my apologies, even though it's not my fault this morning that Facebook has had gremlins in the works. It had gremlins for me. I started setting up this broadcast at 8 o'clock this morning, and I've been trying to sort the gremlins out ever since, but I'll give it a stiff talking to. Now, please don't forget, if you are watching this live on Facebook, this broadcast will no longer be available on my main professional page. You're going to need to take part in the Learning to Paint community. So if you go to your Facebook search engine and you put Learning to Paint with Alison Seaboard at the top, it'll ask you if you'd like to join the group. There's a couple of questions to answer. Please answer those questions so that I know that it's you. Now, we've got 2 moderators on the Learning to Paint page as well. We have the lovely Kath and we have the lovely Dee, who do it voluntarily, okay? So there's 3 of us monitoring that page, and I'm so grateful to them for helping me out with it, because it's a big undertaking. There's nearly 2,000 of you over on that page now, so there's a lot of people to make sure that you're all happy, that you all feel welcome, and that you all feel included. So answer those questions because it helps us out enormously. Now, much bigger news. This Sunday, the 29th of August, my new website goes live. Let's show you the sneak peek, shall we? So this is learningtopaint.co.uk. This is going to be where you go for everything to do with my tuition. If you want to sign up for a class, if you want to join the All Aboard Artists, if you want to read the blog, to watch Technique Tuesday back, there's going to be free resources on there. There's going to be drawing guides. There's going to be colour charts. There's going to be all sorts of stuff. That is going to be a website that changes weekly with the amount of things that I want to put on it. It's going to have a lot more about me. It's going to have a lot more about the things that inspire me. It's going to provide you with links to other websites. It's going to provide you with information about materials, about printing services, all kinds of stuff. But the first launch of it happens this Sunday at 9 a.m. Do go over there and have a look at it. You don't need to do anything, just make yourself a cup of coffee, pull up a chair and have a lovely time flicking through the website. And I'd love to hear what you think about it. I'd love even more if you could tell me what it is that you would like to see on there. It's almost finished. I know that a lot of you are saying, oh, is it finished yet? It's almost finished. I've still got a little bit of work to do. Goodness me, it takes a lot of time to put together. And don't forget that my previous website is going to have an upgrade too. The amazingly fabulous Jasmine has been working on that behind the scenes. So we have a big weekend ahead of us. Don't forget, you can just go straight over there on the Sunday. You don't need any sort of login or any of that kind of information. At 9 a.m. on Sunday, check out learningtopaint.co.uk or check out alisonseaboard.co.uk, two shiny new websites there for you to interact with. I apologise again for any gremlins that have happened this morning. I will go and give Facebook a stiff talking to. I'm going to take Frankie out for a walk first and get away from the technology. But until I see you next week for part 8 of RB, take lots of care of yourselves, won't you? I'm sure I will speak to you before then. But until then, have a lovely, lovely week and we will speak very soon. All right, lovely people. Bye-bye.